Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our live session today. My name is Larissa. I'm an event planner at Reactor, joining you from Brazil. Before we start, I have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. The session is being recorded and will be available to view on demand here on the Reactor YouTube channel within 48 hours. Keep an eye on the chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for your questions. I will now turn it over to our speaker for today. Thank you all and welcome, Bob.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. My name is Bob Tickleman. And what I want to do is give you some guidance around a new relationship that Microsoft has with Anthropic. But, I've got a long history of working at Microsoft. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, it doesn't really matter what I've done in the past. It really is about finding ways to stay relevant. And for over 3 decades, that's what I've done at Microsoft. And since 2016, I've been involved with AI solutions, working with our customers, deploying some of them. So I'm pretty excited about what we're going to be talking today and some of the advancements. So I look to engage with you. You've got my email address there, robtich@microsoft.com. I'd be happy to have people follow up with questions and comments. The only thing I ask for is usually 2 things. I am busy most days, so if you have a house on fire situation and you need an immediate answer, probably not the dude that you want to call. But if you can wait a day or 2 for me to get back to you, I will definitely do that. And the second thing is, asking me a question is great, but I'm going to be showing you our tool, Copilot, or any tool that you want to use. I would suggest that you ask Copilot first the question, see if it is able to answer the question. And if it doesn't, then maybe send me, here's my prompt and response that I got, and I'd be more than happy to help you with that. So with that behind us, a bit about me. If any of you want to start to engage and deal with us and ask questions, we've got moderators that are on the line. I'd be happy to hear from everybody and try and answer your questions in as close to near real time as possible. You may or may not be aware of the long-standing relationship that Microsoft has had with a company called OpenAI, even before they released their first model a little over 4 years ago. And from that relationship, both financial, technical, and resource sharing, Microsoft was able to take those models and what we could now refer to as large language models and build upon our long-standing relationship with AI. For decades, I said Microsoft had AI services where we had speech recognition and we had text-to-speech and voice-to-text. We had image recognition. So we had all the discrete world of AI services that were available for you. And in the last several years, we've announced, this tool recently rebranded under Microsoft Foundry, where you could build these tools. We separately had them as AI services, and we brought them together under Foundry. And we then started releasing our own products in things like Copilot. That's the branded name that we used for a lot of our AI infusement into our product suite. Now, across that spectrum, we have a whole bunch of Copilots, and I'm not going to try and drain the world on those events, but we've got Copilot Personal. That's a free version. We've got Copilot Personal that you could pay for, much like many of the other model producers. And specifically, we have one called M365 Copilot, which gives it some capability that no other AI on the planet currently has. And it's the ability for an organization to safely and securely give access to the corporate data through the Microsoft Graph and a recently added feature called Work IQ. I just want to do a small demonstration of that and show you how we've now taken what was that long-standing relationship where we only had GPT models available in this. We've started to incorporate this new relationship with Anthropic and your ability to work with Claude models across our Copilot infrastructure. So whether it's M365 Copilot Chat, which is what you're seeing right now, I'm going to show you how you can use Copilot Chat in the M365 platform to select a Claude model to be able to respond. To be able to respond to you. I'll then go into something like Excel to do a very similar thing that you could pick either the GPT models, Anthropic, and as of build 2 weeks ago, you're also going to start to see Microsoft's own models coming into this under MAI as an option for us to be able to provide a wider product suite inside of our model catalog. I'm going to then take a brief history or a brief tour of Copilot Studio, which is our agentic work tool to be able to build more sophisticated capabilities than you could build in Copilot Chat in a thing called Agent Builder. And I'll finish up working with and a brief tour in AI Foundry and looking at the ability to pick some models and some of the background work that has to happen. So there are some significant differences between AI Foundry and what I can do in there, or Microsoft Foundry, and what I can do in some of the pre-built tools like Copilot or M365 Copilot Chat. So this is where I'm going to start off with, is taking a look at M365 Copilot. I'm in the chat window, and I can start a new chat. And I'm working with the most current release as of the time of this presentation and the recording. So some of you might see it with the work and web tab at the top. So if you're seeing those slight differences, know that this change might be coming your way. We also have this feature for Work IQ, which is basically that difference between working between work-grounded information and web. But through here, I'm going to be able to pick a variety of different models. And you can see I can pick from an Opus model or the GPT models to be able to provide the model for the response in my prompt itself. Now, one of the questions I asked earlier, and I'm just going to go back to that, I've got two versions of this. I asked Copilot specifically, and this is something I would suggest to you, is help you identify which model you might want to use for whatever solution you're building, whether it be in Copilot Studio or all the way up to our advanced tool in Foundry. And so what I did is I see that I'm able to use Claude models in various Microsoft AI tools, including M365 Copilot, which is where I am right now. We'll show you in Copilot Studio, and again in Foundry. I have several questions. What, if any, restrictions are there? And are there model running in Azure, or are they actually being passed through to Anthropic? Because I get this question quite a bit. So I want to show you some of those things and some of the restrictions as they currently stand as of the time of this recording and presentation. So first and foremost, looking at Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Studio, these options are going to be made available at no additional charges or costs or configurations, but they're not available across the broad spectrum of Microsoft's cloud offerings. And so we have what are called sovereign clouds, and you're seeing for the GCC, GCC High, and the DoD, these are sovereign clouds built for very restrictive government environments where it's separate deployments of our Azure services. So if you're in one of those, know that what I'm talking about may not apply to you specifically. But for the vast majority of organizations, people that are working in our public cloud offering, you're going to have these models available for you. When you take a look at Microsoft Foundry, there are some background requirements. As I said, there's going to be some significant differences as you get more deeply ingrained into the development of an AI solution. Foundry is that kind of high-end tool. We have multiples, but I usually range them in the, in Copilot Chat, you have a thing called Agent Builder. It used to be called Copilot Studio Lite. And anytime you add the word light to something, it usually means that it's, the full thing, Copilot Studio, without a bunch of features. And so you're going to have some capabilities in Copilot Agent Builder to be able to build some form of an agent. It's somewhat restricted. I typically talk about the 4 elements that you have within an agent, where it has instructions, it has some knowledge, it has tools, and flows or connectivity capabilities, to create a workflow. Agent Builder only is going to give you 2 of those, of where you have instructions and information, and you're not going to have the selection of some of the models. As you move across into Copilot Studio, you're going to get more flexibility, and you're going to be able to use all 4 of those areas that I've classified as, true agent building. You're going to add in the capability of adding skills and tools, as well as being able to create that flow or connectivity for an agentic workflow. You're also going to then be able to start to pick the models you want to work with, of which we'll be able to see a variety of Claude models available to us. And as I said, there's a few other tools that you can work with, but I'm only going to focus on the three. And the kind of the granddaddy of them all, the biggest one is usually what is now referred to as Microsoft Foundry. Microsoft Foundry as the tool where you have a wide variety of models, and you'll see that they massively expand inside of Foundry, and you're going to have all the capabilities that we saw in the previous ones plus some. It falls into that pro code environment, so if you want to get there, you can absolutely explore with it. So I want to, and I won't be covering VS Code because there's Claude models that you can select in Visual Studio Code as well. But taking a look at Foundry, there's some background information that unless you're familiar with Azure, you may not be able to get in and work with the Claude model specifically. So if someone else is setting that up an environment up for you, and if you're more of just a developer and you've been working in Foundry for a while, I want to show you some of the background features that you might have to have in place for you to be able to actually properly deploy the Claude models. I'm going to talk about them now. I'll try and show them to you later. And I've got an example of, it might show it to me, but it's going to hit that restriction of being actually able to deploy it. So one of the big first ones is this is not currently available on a pay-as-you-go model or any of the free models. You actually have to be falling into the category of an enterprise agreement, or EA, or this new version of an MCA-E. These are company-sponsored accounts that have to have that capability even to start with. Going down that list, they then have to be able to have permissions to have the account that you're working with available on the marketplace. So I'm going to go into the Azure portal as we get further into this, and I'll show you the Azure marketplace, and you have to have the ability to be able to get things from the marketplace itself. Throughout the Microsoft security model, we use the term called RBAC, or the role-based access control. This is how we govern access to resources inside of our resource platforms, such as Azure. And so you have to have the necessary RBAC permissions granted to you, as well as being able to find a supported region. Currently, again, at the time of this presentation recording, the Claude models are only available in 2 regions inside of Azure. That is going to be US East 2 and Central Sweden are the 2 models, regions that you're working with. And so we hope to expand that out. And I'm going to show you another restriction is, in fact, in some of these cases, we're not actually running the model. It's actually being passed through to Anthropic themselves to perform the activities and then provide the responses back. And I often then get asked the question of, what about security? And so I want to address a lot of this background work as opposed to just showing you. I'll let you have that discovery experience yourself once you've met all these requirements for you to get in, deploy Claude, and then find how you can use it inside of your solutions. So there's those 2 regions you're working with. And so being able to pass through, this is that concept I've talked about. In Foundry, we are going to be responsible for the kind of things that Microsoft would typically do. You're going to have an Entra ID identity that then can be controlled for those RBAC permissions we talked about. So you have to have some of the identity, the endpoints, the URLs or the endpoints and the keys that are going to use to access the models in Foundry. Whichever model you pick, those are still going to be the keys themselves that are going to be controlled. Azure billing is still where this is going to get billed to. You've got your authentication and your governance compliance requirements, all still being controlled through the Microsoft Foundry feature. Where you start to run into it, and they show some examples here, as a customer, you work with Azure and the Foundry endpoints, and then from there, it passes it off to those infrastructure components, either in US East 2 or inside of Central Sweden, where the Anthropic models are then going to reply with that response. And from a security and governance perspective, something that we at Microsoft are quite proud of is, we talk about your data is your data. We do not train on your data. We don't keep your data. We don't retain your data. So a lot of those same governance and compliance commitments that you get from Microsoft are still going to be enforced. So if you come through, you'll see, and I'll give you this prompt. I can make it available to you, or you can create your own. But I just asked it a simple question. Copilot, can you please tell me what the Anthropic models are available, what some of the restrictions might be? However you want to phrase that question, you should be able to get a very similar answer. Now, I mentioned that you could actually pick a model for that response, and there are reasons to have one GPT versus the Claude models. I'm going to show you a specific agent that we have in M365 and show it feature doing a thing called a model council. So under our agents in my M365 Copilot chat, you can see that I've got a set of agents, some that are built by Microsoft. If you're working at an enterprise, you may have some that are shared with you or some that are built by your org. Excuse me. And I'm going to look specifically at the researcher agent. This researcher agent, as most agents do, have some instructions and some of the things I mentioned in the past around what defines an agent, but it is specifically tuned to do deeper research, an activity that might just be a simple prompt and response, giving you a statistical response back in, say, 45 seconds. The exact same prompt, and I do this regularly as a presentation, might take over an hour. It will typically ask some questions up front of, what is it that you're looking for? Is there a target audience? So like any professional researcher that you may hire, you can now go to the researcher agent to go off and provide this higher level research into the response before it just gives you that immediate quick response. So in researcher, I wanted to show this feature where I could get to this thing called a model council. I could absolutely pick a Claude model if I wanted, or I could use the GPT models, but I selected a previous one. So using the exact same prompt I used before, just going into Copilot, I selected the researcher tool and I selected the model council feature. So now what it did is it put that prompt that I gave it about what is the limitations and characteristics of Claude in Foundry, and it's now given it to both models. And so I'm going to get a response back from both. And so this might be a cool experiment for you to see, is give it some option or some challenge and have it come back and see where you think one is going to be more aligned with what it is you're looking for. And so what it did for me, it showed what is the reported complete. You can actually see what its responses were. And it actually does a comparison of where the models aligned on a similar response, where they differed. And so it's kind of a cool tool to be able to come up and have two separate models provide a similar answer and provide the insights into, again, where they align. So you can have a high degree of reliability that that's a pretty consistent answer across both of them, and as well where they might differ to see where there might have been a potential hallucination or a weakness in one model versus another. So just a great tool to be able to get in and, as I said, use two models for your solution. And as I start going through this, in these chat environments, you don't have that choice. As you switch back and forth, you're going to be able to now pick a model for that chat. Once you're inside of that chat, you're not going to have the complexity to be able to switch models within the chat. So going back to my first one, I'm going to close out of here, I didn't pick a model to be the response. I just used the default in this case, which was a GPT model. Now, I can't change the model that I'm working with. And this is often why we have in Copilot Studio and in Foundry, you might want to have multiple models in an overall agentic solution. And so now I can actually go for a specific part of my agentic solution. I might use a Claude model. I might use Sonnet versus I might use Haiku for one. So depending on what that model is best at, you might tailor it for that part of your overall solution. I do want to show you how you could possibly do that inside of a chat itself. And so we have the capability of calling agents. So simply by using a shift @ sign. So while this model might have been built around a response that is going to be based on, in this case, the GPT models, I could have either specific Copilot agents that I've built in Copilot Studio or in Foundry. I could now call that agent, and whatever model that agent was built on, it's now going to perform that activity in what's called in context as opposed to immersive. If it's immersive for the entire chat. But now I'm going to call this feature in. It will then use that agent with its selected model to be able to now provide the response in context of this chat. And then I would get the response back, so I could pick either the analyst or researcher. I've got other models or other agents that I've built, and I could then use it to provide a response, and then I can just basically kick it out and then go back into my chat. So you just be like having a group of people in your room that you're communicating with as a chat, and then you're going to bring in a researcher for a response. You move that back out, and you're back into the model that you're working with. So not quite an agentic workflow, but it's a way to kind of bring in models into a chat environment and introducing that concept of you want agents to have specific models to meet the specific goals and outcomes of what that agent's going to work with. And now we have a wide variety of the Claude models that are available to us. I should say Anthropic, with their new names that they have available for us to pick from. I'm just going to stop there for a second to see if there's maybe any comments or questions. We've got some moderators. I'm sure that they're busy answering those questions to see if anything might have bubbled up that they maybe want to bring to attention to the presentation itself. Oh, okay. Moving over to the next product that I was mentioning, Copilot Studio as a separate product is your ability to now get in and create a full agentic workflow and full function agent capability. It does have a separate license that comes along with it. And you can see down the left-hand side, I can create an agent. I'm going to come in and start that process. And we talked about those four major characteristics that create the foundation for an agent. You get your instructions over here on the left-hand side, and this becomes the persona or the attributes that you want that agent to take on. I don't want to make this about creating agents. I just want to kind of touch on a number of topics. And so down the right-hand side, you get the model that you want to select. And so in here, I can pick from the variety of GPT models. And you can now see I've got a variety of the Claude models in here. And as that catalog expands, they should appear in here as well. I see a question that maybe has come up from, why would I want to use a Claude model over a GPT or auto-selected models? I often talk with people that any question you ask me, you're going to get one of four answers. The first answer is it depends, and that's what applies here, and I'll talk about that. Answer number two is it's available in the next release of the product. Answer number three, it's available as a download off of the web. And answer number four is I wasn't invited to that meeting. So why you might want to pick one model versus another is in a few minutes, when I get to the Foundry piece, you're going to see that the model catalog gives you the capability to compare one model versus another. Now, generally, and I'm going to give a broad general recommendation, that if you wanted something that was scientific and calculated, you may prefer a Claude model. If you wanted something that was more language specific and kind of broad based, you might pick a GPT. But for me, the best reason to do that is maybe ask Copilot itself to actually come in and pick which model it thinks it might be best to do what it is that you want to do. I am looking at creating a long creative Word document, which model, either GPT or Claude, would you recommend? So if you're unsure, again, I'm going to show you how to pick it, and there's some statistical things. Within the AI industry, there are certain metrics that all models are measured against for things like concurrency and accuracy. I'm not going to get into all of them. We have full courses that we teach this. We've got currently the AI 103 course that we make available. We talk about what some of those attributes are and reasons why you might pick one model versus another. So there are quantifiable values that you can look at. You can look at token costs. Which ones are going to cost more? Are you looking for a light model, so maybe something like Haiku, or do you want this long thinking, more expensive, deep capability? But you can also ask, in our case, Copilot, and see. This might even be one that you might even put out to that model council to see if Claude gives you a different answer than the GPT model, to see if maybe they favored themselves and feel comfortable that if they are being true and fair, that you're getting a common response or the correct response. And so in this case, it says for long creative Word documents, it's going to pick a Claude model versus the GPT. My first choice in here for GPT Copilot, and it gives you some solutions around which one's going to go. So my general answer, it depends on what the outcomes of what it is you're looking for. And if you have that criteria of what it is, I'm doing scientific analysis against, a 9,000 row, 18 column spreadsheet, maybe the Claude models might be better for that. So I didn't show it, but know that you do have that choice, even inside of, say, something like Excel, working with Copilot. You have that choice of the different models that are available to you. Hopefully that answered your questions. Okay. So as I mentioned, when you're picking an agentic build as a full agent, you might use something like Copilot Studio to do that for you. And I'm in Copilot Studio. You can build an agent. You can pick the model that you want it to do. And this is where we can start to add those other characteristics while I can add instructions and knowledge into the agent builder process. I don't get the ability to connect agents. I don't get the skills and the tools capability. That is only going to get or happen when you move from Agent Builder to Copilot Studio. Again, you're also going to be able to pick the models you're working with. Taking a look at those workflows is what's going to allow me to then literally drag and drop to create that agentic workflow. You create that triggering activity, and now I maybe have different models. And I've built solutions that are like this, where I have some kind of triggering activity, and either an agent, I can have a prompt that I'm working with, I can pull any one of these in, and I could now have two different agents that I've built, maybe one that's based on a Claude model and one that's based on a GPT model. And then I could give it to both of those, very similar to what we did with the researcher and going to the model council. It went from some triggering activity, in my case, my prompt, and it then branched that off into two separate agents that would then be based on different models to possibly take advantages of what their skill set might be best. In many of these workflows that I might create, I'll either have it go off to, maybe I've got one that is going to judge it based on security of the solution that was being looked at. I'm going to have one that's going to be based around a financial analysis on the cost of what that solution might be. And I have one that is designed for operational excellence. So I have some triggering activity that might be a request that passes that request off to three different agents, all with different models that then would come up with a solution. I could even have them talking amongst themselves to come up with a common solution, or in the first case, they're all going to come up with their best solution, and it passes it off to another agent that will take all three of them in, evaluate them based around its criteria, its instructions, and then be able to pick which one or combination of them. I'm going to pick this one from security because it falls within the financial allocations that we have for it. I'm going to then take this other one from security because it met a different financial or operational benefit that you're dealing with, not the recommended one, but one that fit either the operational excellence or the financial restraints that it had to adhere to. So again, you're building a solution using Copilot Studio to have now an agentic workflow with each agent possibly having its own model, now including the Claude models that go along with that. I'm going to stop here for a minute, just again to see if anybody has any comments or questions that they might have before I move over into Azure and looking at Foundry as that bigger tool more than this, this pro code, low code environment in Copilot Studio. I don't see anything bubbling up. So as I said, AI services as an Azure offering has been made available from Microsoft for almost a decade. We've had a long history of making these services available. There's a great video that's on YouTube if you want to go watch it. Put in Microsoft Blind Engineer. Now that's almost a 9-year-old video of where we were able to build a solution using our Azure services that had image recognition. So, it's a gentleman, he's got a pair of glasses on, it's sunglasses, got a camera on it. He swipes it. It says, I think it's a picture of a girl throwing a Frisbee in a park. How does it know all that? It actually shows the targeting frames, picking up the image recognition and the image analysis capabilities. That was a separate service inside of Azure. We had the large language, or we had the model training capabilities. We had the neural networks, and we had machine learning. We had all the base components. And initially, I would have to spend hours creating training materials and train the systems to do the activities we wanted to do. These have been significantly reduced now because by picking a model of your choice to do that mass training, it now brings that large language model training capability to your solution, significantly reducing the requirements to do that upfront training. Now, it doesn't mean that you still might not have to tune your solution to have specific situations identified, but the bulk of the training is going to come through the selection of the model. But you're now building this pro code environment, founded on Azure services. And so you're going to have to start, as I said, at the beginning with a Microsoft Entra ID tenant ID. You're going to then have to have some Azure resources. And inside of Azure, there's a thing called a subscription. Inside Azure, the subscription becomes the billing construct in which resource usage is going to be billed to. And so in the hierarchy of an Azure tenant, the tenant being the highest level, you get a set of things called management groups. In another course, we're not going to cover it, but below the management group, you then get the subscription. Inside of the subscription or below the subscription is a thing called a resource group that then will take the resources inside that resource group and bill it to that subscription. We talked about you have to have an enterprise agreement or an MCA-E subscription to be able to do this. So if you have a pay-as-you-go or any of the other types, you're not going to be able to create an Azure Foundry resource and bill it to that subscription if it's a Claude model and it hasn't been provisioned that way. Now, you can build other things. You can have a pay-as-you-go and build other Azure resources to those if you want, but we have very specific requirements for the Claude models currently. So I've got several subscriptions here. We talked about that term called RBAC, or the role-based access control. Now, it would be nice if we were able to pick a common name for the same thing. Now, RBAC, the term that I use, the document uses, you'll see it here in the graphical interface as a term called access control, or IAM. So now there's 3 words that you can use: IAM, identity access management, access control, or RBAC. I'll be using RBAC. Inside of the RBAC for the subscription, this is where you can now come in and look at this thing called role assignments. Look at the Microsoft documentation. It talks about the different role assignments. And so you'll see in here, I've got some for like a thing called an owner, probably over subscribed or over provisioned an account that has too much information. I'd say a reader is not enough, but then we've got a whole set of roles: an Azure AI administrator, we've got an Azure AI developer, and an agentless via. So we've got all these specific roles that you could potentially use. There's some recommendations in the documentation of which roles you're going to need specifically for Claude at the marketplace and the subscription level to start this process. I mentioned that below subscription is a thing called a resource group, and I've got a number of resource groups. And I have one for specifically Welcome Anthropic. It's in here that you need to build what's called a Foundry resource and a Foundry project. So this is separated from the Azure environment from the Foundry environment. I could have built some of these actually in Foundry, and I might do that if we have time in the demonstration. It probably works best because in many companies, these administrative roles are done by different people. You as the developer might be able to create the project inside an existing Foundry resource, but you may not have the permission to create the Foundry resource. I fortunately, this is my tenant, I have access to both of those. But you have a resource group that has a subscription that's associated with it, and you're going to need at a minimum a Foundry and a Foundry project in which you then build resources. And you'll see this, as I said, in a few minutes when I switch over to Foundry and actually start deploying models and working with selecting models. You'll see that these are both in US East 2, and they're built to the subscription that I have that has the necessary permissions and the capability to have an enterprise agreement or MCA-E associated with it. I'll stop there for a second to see if anybody maybe has some questions before I leave Azure and Azure administration before I go into Foundry. No? Several ways that I can get to Foundry inside of the Azure portal, which if I didn't say before is portal.azure.com. I could select from the waffle menu in the upper left-hand corner, I could select AI Foundry. Or I could just type in AI.azure.com. And you'll get to the same location. So you'll see, however you get there, going directly to the Foundry portal. It should authenticate you and log you in with your credentials, and you can now start building your solution. I'm going to start that. It's going through that authentication. There is a new and old portal. We're in the process of transitioning this. Again, once again, if you're watching this live versus recorded version, this is what the old portal would look like, where I got my Azure resources here. You can see my projects, and I have those Azure Foundry components. If you remember, I go back to them, and inside of a Foundry resource, you then have a project or projects related to that Foundry resource. In many cases, and very soon, you're going to be brought directly to the new portal. I'm going to switch to this. And it gives you a slightly different look. And that's where I want to spend my time, because that's probably what most of you are probably going to experience. And again, I can switch back and forth from the old Foundry to the new Foundry and back to the new Foundry if I wanted. It's in here that in the top left-hand corner that I can select from the various projects that I have. Remember, we have a Foundry resource, and then we have projects or projects within that Foundry resource. A project could have multiple models and multiple agents and solutions inside of the project. Excuse me. If you want to take a look at, again, AI 103 as a course or any of the other courses on Microsoft Learn, we have lots of learnings that will teach you how to build projects. We have one of a legacy component called a project hub project, where you can now have multiple resources like Azure storage accounts that then could be made available to multiple agents with inside of that same project. Or do I have to then re-provision it? So getting into a level of complexity that we don't have to be able to solve today specifically. But you can have multiple projects. You can switch around from a project. And then you have this common interface of a home base for that project. You're going to then take a look at discover, build, operate, and then some of the other features. And I just want to give you that quick tour. I could actually build, let's actually go into the view, the deployments. So for this project, I'm now on the build area. And under here, I can see the agents that I have, the deployments. I talked about that fine tuning that we might have to do to the pre-trained models that we're going to select, my tools, my knowledge, my memory, my data, the evaluations, and then the guardrails. So quite a bit more complexity and that you can bring to your solutions and developing them in Foundry. But a lot of the same skills, as I said, starting off from when I was working in Copilot Agent Builder all the way into Copilot Studio, we're now getting more capabilities into the one area. So I want to actually deploy a model first. And I want to show you something along the way. So in here, I can have the full list of models that are available to us. There's a significant number other than the ones we're talking about today, specifically the Claude models. But you can see I got a wide variety, the GPT, I've got some Microsoft ones, I've got DeepSeek, but there are hundreds of models that are available for you to be able to use as the model for the build process that you're working with. You can get into this compare model. So I'm going to go back to the question that was asked earlier. Why would I use one versus another? So I can actually select the models. So I've got 3 GPTs, GPT-5. Let me go to a Claude model here. So let's take Opus 4.7, and I got a Grok model. Now I mentioned a number of standard evaluations or metric values that you can look at based on industry standards. And so there's things like, what is the quality of the responses they're dealing with? Safety, what is the estimated cost that they're working with? Tokens, chat completion. So you can now have these quantifiable measures to go across and make a choice based around some very specific requirements that you could define to pick the best model. Now, I'm going to try and deploy this, and we come into some of the settings. Now, I'm going to go through a failed deployment first, just to show you that I maybe have not met all of the requirements. So let's go into deploy. Don't you love doing demonstrations live? I'm not going to wait for this to come up. Let's get into build. Waiting for this to complete. So in here, I was able to deploy very quickly a GPT 4.1 model in a standard global deployment. I've got my different features. I have a playground here. I can give it some prompts and responses. I can give it my instructions and work with this. I could then possibly publish this. So you saw I didn't have any problems doing this. Now I've got a Reactor. I probably should have numbered it because I'm going to create another model, but I'm going to try and select a Claude model, and you're going to see that it brings me partway through the build process, but it may fail because I didn't meet some of the compliant requirement. Now there's a new one that I didn't mention from the previous list. We've talked about you've got to have the right region, you got to have the right type of subscription, you got to have the right permissions. Inside of Foundry, you may also need quotas. And so quota is an allotment of a pre-approved model that, in addition to all the other stuff you have to have, you may not have the necessary quota to be able to perform the activities you're working for. So this is a way for an organization to put cost controls around model usages of maybe some higher end models that have potentially long running expensive token costs that they could then, as I said, put those guardrails around that. So let me give this a try. I'm going to come back in. I'm going to create a new agent. Again, some background about the Claude model itself. You can take a look at some of the metric values we took a look at. Tells you what it's good for. Gives you some sample code. I'm going to try and deploy this. So there's an example of that model I was telling, or I don't have necessary quota requirements to be able to deploy this. And so I would then follow through, and there's a quota request component that you could do to make that request, then to be able to get the allocations to deploy those resources. Let's see if there's a question that comes in. I see some comments. Oh, okay. Go back here. I had planned for some of these challenges as well. So I have a pre-recorded video that I was going to show just in case I wasn't able to do it here live. I want to show you a deployment of a model and then being able to access it using something like CLI in VS Code to be able to interact with that model. So let me just go through and make sure I can get this deployed. I'm going to deploy a model. If this works this time. Use Opus. One of my other demos out here. Let's go. Okay, I'm going to stop fumbling around here. I'm going to bring in this video that I have. And so what I've done in a very similar graphical interface, what I just showed you, I've got my Foundry project. I've got a deployment of, in this case, Sonnet 4.6. I've been able to pick the model. I've given it its instructions of what it needs to work with. And then I've got some code that I want to work with here. Now, in the model and within the project, you have a thing called an endpoint. And so maybe I'll go back and show that. If I get into the main features, you can see the resource ID. I've got my subscription. I've got the resource group it's connected to, and I want to get to in this case, I have an API key and then the project endpoint. You're going to see this in a few minutes when I go back into the code. So this is going to be the endpoint that I would use to connect from my application, or in my case, my VS Code. I'm going to be able to connect to this model and be able to run it when I give it the necessary keys. And then there's my OpenAI endpoint. So let's go back and take a look at this. And you're seeing some of that appear here. This is the sample code. So what is the project endpoint? Back.
Right, you'll see the code samples. The endpoint looks something like this.
That's your base URL. Then there's your API keys. Treat it the way you would treat any credentials. You want to make sure that you store it securely, either in environmental variables or in key vaults, and keep it out of your source code and version control.
API keys are the fastest way to get.
Just to let you know, this was a recording I did with Anthropic when we made the announcement. So you're seeing the two of us on the screen, but I had this as a backup just in case it wasn't working for me in the live presentation. Having done this before.
Started. For production, Foundry also supports Microsoft Entra ID, which is keyless authentication. Your Azure.
That's an interesting point that she brought up, and I didn't mention it, but I was using the API key to access it, and it becomes a potential vulnerability where you could use a Microsoft Entra ID as the authentication method to be able to access it.
Identity is the credential with role-based access control on top and no secret for anyone to leak. We'll use the API key today because it gets you moving fastest.
We have an endpoint, a key, and a working deployment. So now we can write some code. We'll use Python here, and the same pattern is available in TypeScript, C#, Java, and PHP. Anthropic's SDKs all include a Foundry-aware client.
Three things are happening here. We import Anthropic Foundry, the client class that knows how to talk to your Azure endpoint. We call messages.create with a model, which is your deployment name, a max tokens limit, and a list of messages, which is the shape of every request you'll ever make. And model is your deployment name. This pattern looks similar in other clients' SDKs like C#, TypeScript, Java, and PHP. And the final line simply pulls the text out of the Claude's reply and prints it. And there's the response. So what I wanted to do was spend some time introducing this new relationship that Microsoft has with a new model provider, or not new model provider, new to us, that Foundry as a tool is the ultimate capability to have all of the tools that you may want to provide in the building of your solutions. You're going to have a wide variety of models from various vendors, and we now include the Claude models. We're happy to include them as part of the family. Microsoft has even included them in a variety of our products, where things like M365 Copilot, we're looking at Copilot Studio. Microsoft has recently announced a feature called Scout as well as Cowork. And so these are based on some models that were different from when we originally came up. And so it's allowing us to build new tools. And so I encourage you to take a look at Foundry as a way to build your AI solutions with a broad range of tools, a range of models to select from, as long as you meet the billing requirements and some and permissions. We've talked about that. And now you have a full set of tools to bring to bear into that agentic model solution that you may be building for yourself or for your businesses. So with that, we have a few more minutes left, but I just want to be able to maybe answer some questions. That's what I wanted to show you across the suite of this, but if that was all you have time for, I hope to see you again in another one of these Reactor sessions. And look for us online. We are now publishing more of this stuff on YouTube, as well as a wide variety of medias where we can make these trainings much more readily available and more timely than some of the stuff that we've done in the past, and where we did a lot of it more as instructor-led training. So with that, I want to thank you for spending the last 53 minutes with us, but I can always give you back 7 more minutes in your day if that's going to be valuable to you. So with that, thanks very much for joining me. My name again is Bob Tickleman, and I hope to see you again at a future presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob, for the presentation today. And thank you all for joining. We are always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. So if you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find the link to our survey on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you on the next one.